So for our last session of the day, we're going to talk about what I think is arguably the most important topic kind of in this industry right now, which is how we get from a $400 billion total market value industry based mostly on speculation to a much bigger industry based on kind of real-world usage. And on this panel, we've got two spectacular founders who are building really important projects in the ecosystem to talk about kind of how they see us getting there. So I want to start broad, and then we'll kind of get narrow. But I mean, what do you guys think needs to happen, broadly speaking, for us to get from speculation to real-world usage?
So I think there's a number of things that are really obviously needed currently, and perhaps the first one is what my project is also working on, right? Is a stablecoin. So basically, it should be pretty clear, and I think it's like really become common knowledge at this point, that the volatility of sort of the traditional cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum are holding back adoption to a certain degree, right? We're actually seeing retailers sort of stopping, like delisting Bitcoin on their e-commerce platform, for instance. And just like that, the trend of volatility holding back blockchain technology and cryptocurrency is something that needs to be broken with basically stablecoin projects. And this is one of these like basic building blocks that are needed before we can really just get to the next step. I think there's also a number of other major issues that need to be dealt with. Probably scalability is another obvious one. And then another obvious is regulation, right? There needs way more regulatory clarity. But I also think the trends are very positive here. I mean, for instance, you have stablecoin projects like MakerDAO building decentralized stablecoins. We have so many different scalability solutions coming out. And also we're seeing a lot of positive trends in terms of regulation in various jurisdictions. And also this environment of almost like jurisdictional arbitrage and competition between different regulatory regimes and who can, you know, boost and attract business the most.
So hi everyone, I'm Erik Voorhees. I'm the CEO and founder of Shapeshift. Probably first point I would say is that adoption is a gradient, not a destination. So there's not a day on which we'll wake up and realize that this stuff has taken over the world. It happens over time, and I'm also not convinced that it hasn't already occurred. So now if you walk around the streets in most places, at least in the Western world, and you ask someone what Bitcoin is, they know what it is. They've heard of it. They can tell you it's a digital currency. Maybe they can tell you a little more than that. That is a huge milestone. And when I got into this stuff in 2011, that was the dream that we had, was at what day will like people actually know what this is? So we're there. And the fact that you can talk to family members now and it's a respectable topic to discuss crypto finance is pretty amazing. Maybe my family's weird, but we talk about that stuff all the time.
But I think some people to that would say, yes, that may be the case, but they mainly know what it is because of speculation, right? Would you agree with that? Disagree? How would you address that?
Yeah, certainly speculation, meaning like acquiring the asset because you think it'll go up, is the majority of what people are doing with crypto today. But that shouldn't be surprising any more than that same phenomenon happened in the dot-com bubble, where long before many really good web companies came out and really sustainable, profitable web businesses happened, people were speculating on that asset class for a decade. So I don't think there's anything new or strange to that. And also, I think each asset itself goes through its own mini phase where in the early days it is 100% speculation, and over time it moves to 70 or 50 or 20% speculation. Bitcoin, when I got involved, was 100% speculation. You could not use it for anything, really. And now you actually can. There are a lot of people that are using Bitcoin for payments, for international remittances, and it's still mostly speculation, but the gradient is happening. And Ethereum and some of the newer coins are going through that same process, where they were almost entirely speculative at first, and they slowly, over several years, earn an increasing number of use cases.
So I want to get to stablecoins, which you mentioned, Rune, and which obviously you're working on. I think some people, mainly I would say people that already own Bitcoin or Ether or other cryptocurrencies, think that those cryptocurrencies will while they're volatile now, volatility is decreasing, and they'll ultimately, when liquidity gets there, get to a point where they could actually be used for medium of exchange, right? I think your view would be that's not the case. Maybe it's not. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so actually, I think first of all, I want to say I don't think speculation as a use case is necessarily a bad thing. And I think an example of this is an asset class like gold, right? Where you sort of think of gold as a very successful asset, right? That is actually primarily used for this type of for speculation and as like a counter-cyclical hedge. And I think that use case will also always just be very, prevalent for Bitcoin and Ethereum and those kind of assets, and just be something that they perhaps will always be used for. In fact, maybe Bitcoin will really supplant gold as the gold of the future. That being said, I think gold is also a good example of why this thesis that Bitcoin will just be like the superior money of the future automatically could be wrong. And I think actually like an easy example to think of is just like the gold standard, and basically when gold was money, and how you can easily look at just that historical data and just see how inflation and consumer pricing gradually became more and more controlled and more stable basically over time as fractional reserve banking expanded and monetary policy became more, I guess you can say, intelligent or more prevalent in the market. And I think it's always going to be the case that something like a fixed supplier, like fixed monetary policy asset, will never be able to reach the same level of stability as something with a proper monetary policy that is actually trying to optimize for stability. And if you don't have that same level of stability, you also run into trouble with stuff like liquidity and just like the willingness to accept a particular currency, and also more like technical things like spreads in the market, which is why I ultimately think that Bitcoin is not going to be able to compete directly against a stable coin as something as a currency that gets mass adoption in the blockchain age.
Why do you think people are so emotional about stablecoins? It seems to be a topic that a lot of people, especially on Reddit and Twitter and things like that, say that's never going to work, that's a stupid idea, right? It seems to be one of those kind of polarizing topics. Do you agree with that, and do you have a sense why that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many reasons, and I think one really obvious reason is that there are a lot of stablecoin schemes out there. So all stablecoins aren't equal. There are many different models for them, and a lot of these models are actually very, I guess you could, if you want to put it mildly, you could say experimental, or also just they don't really make sense, and there are unanswered questions on how they actually will stay stable in the long run. And I mean, we often experience that we get lumped in with that, right? So people essentially strawman all stable coins because they look at the crazy ones, and then they just naturally assume that it's not going to work, and they will even just decide and conclude that stablecoin as a concept is fundamentally impossible, which I think is kind of short-sighted, to just flat out say it's impossible to stabilize a token, because then I feel like that same logic could be applied to a currency, right? And we do definitely see that there are certain currencies that are more stable than others, and that primarily comes down to the quality of the monetary policy and just the difference in the models behind currencies.
So I actually want to disagree with something there. I don't think that the major currencies of the world are stable because of their monetary policy. The reason that they're stable is because they are huge markets and a lot of people trust them. And far more stable than any fiat currency over the long term has been gold, which obviously does not have a monetary policy. And even though gold is more volatile on a year-to-year basis over centuries, it is the most stable asset of all. So I think in crypto's case, what we should be excited about is that people can experiment with these things. So people can design coins with all sorts of different monetary policies, some of which are passive, some of which are managed, some of which try to achieve stability, some of which don't care about stability. And we will see over time which of these work, and that's going to be really exciting. And I think the big cryptos like Bitcoin, Ethereum, the others that get large, they will achieve stability asymptotically as they get larger. They're already much more stable than they were several years ago.
Yeah, I think it's also important to talk about how there are many different sort of definitions of stability, right? Because one thing is something like extremely short-term stability that can manifest itself as like spreads in the market, for instance. So, for instance, we see how the US dollar is basically used as a denominating currency for almost all forex pairs, and sort of all trades between like all cross pairs typically go through the US dollar, because it's just over the very short term, it's just so incredibly stable compared to basically any other path you can take, that this is what people choose to do. But that doesn't really say anything about the US dollar's sort of hedge against inflation over time, for instance, right? Which is a different type of stability that's more long term, and for instance, something where Bitcoin obviously excels, right? I mean, because Bitcoin hasn't just been stable, it hasn't just protected you against inflation, it has given you massive gains over time. And I definitely agree that it's really exciting to see the blockchain technology or in the cryptocurrency space just open up innovation here, and challenge the logic of old, of how a currency should be run and how an economy should look, and also the importance of inflation.
We don't have to like sit and talk and debate about monetary policy much anymore. That was the case. That was what people had to do when monetary policy was set and you couldn't experiment freely in an open marketplace. If people want to try new economic ideas now with crypto, you can just build them. And a guy in a garage can go build a new monetary system now. That's an incredible thing.
Mm-hmm. That kind of relates to my next question, which is, I think you guys both started in Bitcoin, right? And you were, I think in the early days, Bitcoin maximalist, right? And you ultimately, clearly or not, you're both kind of building in the Ethereum and kind of other tokens. So what got you there, would you say? And why are there Bitcoin maximalists still that are so passionate that aren't recognizing that there's a completely new economy being formed around tokens?
So the thing that really just captivated me and brought me so heavily into Bitcoin originally when I first saw it was just this very basic vision of digital sovereignty, and how by using Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain and just like this decentralized system of nodes, people all over the world would suddenly be able to band together and essentially like combine their power and achieve things that otherwise would have been harder to do because of things like bad state actors or something, right? That have these like fiat laws and opinions that they enforce on other people, and it was just so amazing to see a technological solution to that, because that's probably not what people were expecting before Bitcoin, right? That you could actually have an impact on like politics and this kind of stuff purely through technology. And as a Bitcoin maximalist, I think a lot of what it comes down to is just this almost like the pain of seeing people leaving your ecosystem and like fragmenting, and like the idea that everyone should stay on the same thing because that's where we're strongest together, I think is like a major theme. And then I also just think that there's a really strong element of, you sort of get more than just financial invested in coins, right? You get emotionally attached to them when you own a lot of them. So I think typically if people sell, like if a Bitcoin maximalist sells all his Bitcoin, suddenly he will likely have a different opinion on it afterwards.
Probably the number one reason why someone is a Bitcoin maximalist or any kind of maximalist is because that's all they own. Any of those people, if they took some meaningful portion of that asset and turn it into something else, 5% of it or whatever, they will start discovering that their mind becomes more open to that other asset. And they will start using their brain power instead of defending what they have to being open to what, well, still what they have, but being open to something new. I definitely used to be a maximalist, and my journey to shedding that was seeing two things. One, that not all these assets would be currencies, that there will be many digital assets that would do all sorts of different things, some of which would have analogs in the pre-crypto world and some of which were brand new. And basically, when I started seeing it become diverse, I realized that that was part of the decentralization that was the promise of Bitcoin in the first place. You can't, at the same time, be in favor of decentralization and advocate decentralization and then also advocate for the monoculture of one blockchain. I think that is mental gymnastics that someone should not allow their mind to do. If you care about decentralization, you should want many different blockchains for all the obvious reasons. And so I'm very much in favor of a world in which people are experimenting in lots of ways. That said, most coins, most tokens, most assets will go to zero, and that's okay. This is what the experimentation means.
So I want to get back to kind of the usage aspect of the discussion, and I'm curious, Erik, you and what you guys have built at Shapeshift is mostly kind of an application, if you will, around speculation and investing, right? And so how are you thinking about, and obviously that's been a spectacular business to be in over the past few years, but how are you thinking about kind of use cases beyond that?
I try to not, well, for the purpose of building Shapeshift, I try to put some blinders on and not focus on all the different ways in which things could be used, because then I start wanting to build those things and I need to focus on making Shapeshift good. So Shapeshift will not try to do everything everywhere. It is not a company that is trying to make use cases for crypto. We assume that use cases for crypto will emerge. Many smart people will build them over time. And so we're trying to build a fast and easy engine for people to move value between any of these assets into any other. So that's the one thing that we try to focus on and that I feel is pretty important to stay focused on.
What about just personally? Are there, I guess, personally you're not really focused on other use cases either?
Yeah, I think so. One incredible use case that has happened is the token sale. That concept of raising capital through tokens sent in by people from all over the world of all different classes and races and nationalities, of all different levels of sophistication, into a project that simply inspired them to do so is incredibly powerful and I think is going to change the world. Other use cases, I think tokenized securities themselves will be. So shares of companies, that will become bigger and bigger. And then I think video game assets are going to be a huge theme over the next 18 to 24 months. CryptoKitties was a great proof of this concept, but that'll be a use case that'll be very fun. I mean, basically all the assets and properties within a game that people seek out and play with will have discernible units to them, will have an understandable quantity, we'll be able to transfer them between different ecosystems and different environments and different countries. That's going to be a really fun world to play around in, and I think that'll be a big theme.
Rune, how about yourself? At Maker, you're obviously building kind of middleware that hopefully could power, applications. What are applications that you think are particularly exciting?
Yeah, so it's definitely, like I said earlier, it's a case that most of these next generation use cases need something like a stablecoin and then also these other things I was talking about. And I think, and like I said, I think all these different building blocks that are needed are really close to actually reaching a point where we will see these real amazing use cases emerge that will turn the industry on its head to some degree. And while obviously token sales and just like the speculation and things like security tokens and just like this whole aspect of it will always be a major revolutionary part of the blockchain revolution and the blockchain space. I think it will start to really get interesting, in particular when companies, just like the industry basically starts to really embrace blockchain technology as a way for them to improve the way they communicate and they do business with each other. So the supply chain, or like the business-to-business world of supply chains is one of the largest, if not the largest market in the world. It's so vast and sits under every single thing you buy or purchase as a service typically. And it's just like, it's a market that currently is highly inefficient with really old technology, typically from the 80s. In many cases, it's not even digital, like it's paper-based. And it just has so many characteristics that are exactly the type of problems that blockchain solves, such as slow settlement times, and like a lack of insight and asymmetry between powerful large actors who then get special rules, and then small and medium-sized companies being treated unfairly, essentially, due to the power dynamic. And then also just the fact that you have many parties collaborating but not necessarily trusting each other. And I think in particular that last part, that's exactly what blockchain solves more than anything else, right? That you can collaborate and you can work together in a trustless manner, right? You don't have to trust each other. You still know business is going to get done as usual, the way you want it to be done. So I think breaching this market, and as we talked about earlier, it's been promised that there would be this major revolution coming here in the B2B world and the supply chain, actually for years at this point. And it still hasn't happened just yet. But like I said earlier, I think the major inroads here are like the movements are starting to occur, and the rumbling is there. And once it really gets started, I think it will be like a floodgate. Like we will really start to see just companies scramble to truly integrate blockchain technology. And that will, in the future, could become the new face of blockchain. That is really like, it's the thing that sort of powers the relationship between companies.
Got it. So I guess the contrary argument there would be, this has been promised with Bitcoin and Bitcoin as the rail for cross-border. That hasn't really materialized to any significant degree that I've seen. And lots of talk about private blockchain efficiencies within organizations and things like that. So what is the catalyst, if any, that you think gets kind of businesses to finally start benefiting from the efficiencies of blockchains?
Well, so I'd like to say it's the DAI stablecoin is going to be a major catalyst here. But obviously, just like, I mean, the existence of a stablecoin is just a necessary building block. And I think there has been stablecoins in existence for a while, but there's never been any properly prominent ones. And I think that instability and the fact that you would have to use something like Bitcoin and Ethereum if you wanted to really like plug into a decentralized business-to-business network, I think that has really held executives back from taking it seriously at all. And large companies in particular, or just like traditional industry, they're slow moving and they're very happy to find an excuse for them to not even have to worry about this, right? And just go back to whatever they actually focus on. So that's like, I think the major catalyst basically is just finally sort of the beginning of a critical mass where we start to see some proper experiments and some proper implementation that moves in the right direction, which is, we are working heavily on that, right? So we are actually spending a lot of energy on trying to work with like various industry use cases in the real world with real companies and seeing how we can finally like implement blockchain technology in a way that isn't, I guess you can say, pushy or like unnecessary, right? Because that's how a lot of people see it, is that it's this, but with Bitcoin or but with blockchain, but with no real reason why you want to do it other than it's cool.
Mm-hmm. So Erik, on Shapeshift, what are you guys particularly excited about for the next year?
I think we're excited that we can get back to building things for a while. So 2017 was exciting because the industry got a huge amount of capital. A bunch of businesses became profitable. A bunch of businesses raised money through token sales. And of course, the balance sheets of anyone who was holding crypto swelled to huge heights. And just keeping up with that growth was really the focus of the whole last year. And now a whole bunch of companies, ours included, are very well capitalized, and we can be deploying it. We can be building things, we can be hiring people, we can be creating organizations. That's what I'm excited about. I like to build stuff, and it's been, ever since I got into this struggle that all entrepreneurs face of trying to convince the world that your idea is good so that they will give you money so that you can build. That happened last year. The industry got all the money that it needs for a very long time. So we can all build, and that's what I'm really excited about.
So we're about out of time. I did want to open it up for a few questions if anyone has questions for these guys.
My name is Hector from DexFreight. We're building a decentralized platform for logistics. We're partnering with MakerDAO, but I have a question for Shapeshift. So our dual token model have actually security token. We're doing an offering here. How do you see these secondary markets for, how soon do you see them come, given the regulation and, all the necessary steps that need to happen with the regulation, basically?
Is the question, how soon do I see exchanges that have licenses to trade securities tokens?
Yes, and if you guys are going to be part of that movement also. T0, I know it's a big one, but I've seen Start Engine and I've seen some other lookings for that.
I think it will definitely happen within 18 months, and I hope it happens within 12 months. There are probably 4 projects I'm aware of that are trying to build securities compliant exchanges, T0 being the most well-known. I'm sure there are at least 3 times that number that don't announce themselves for obvious reasons. And then I think that's just like new exchanges that are trying to be built from the ground up to be securities exchanges. I think a lot of the crypto exchanges will also be pursuing securities licenses so that they can be trading both. And that'll be a race between those 2 groups to see who does it first. All those groups should be competing basically to be the next NASDAQ, because 10 years from now, maybe 15 years from now, every security, every share of equity will be a token. And that market is going to be absolutely massive. So I expect a big gold rush in that in the coming months.
Okay, we've got time for one more question if you guys have one more.
Yeah, getting back to what you were talking about, the stability in the currencies, just wondering what you would comment on a couple of economic ideas, for whatever it's worth. There are 2 economic thinkers that have certain ideas about stability. One is the economic theory of regulatory capture, that basically regulatory capture leads to booms and busts like we saw in 2008. I think that economist is George Stigler. Please correct me if anyone knows that. That's one. The second one is Bernard Litauer. It's one of the architects of the euro. And his thinking on stability is that we need as many different mediums of exchange, as many currencies and tokens and diversities of that throughout the world in order to create more prosperity and stability. What do you guys think of those ideas? Are you familiar? Do you agree, disagree, and so on?
So the first theory you talk about of regulatory capture causing stability, I think is interesting. I mean, I'm actually not familiar with either of those theories, or sort of how they're laid out as arguments. I guess a big question here is also, what does stability mean in this context? But I think definitely, to a large degree, this and actually, as you were mentioning earlier, right, that the stability of something like the US dollar comes from the enormous size of the American market, for instance, right? And I think in the context of this, it definitely makes sense that if you want to have a stable currency, you need to ensure that there is this wide consensus that this is the currency we're using, right? And we're all relying on this thing, and we even elect institutions to properly control its monetary policy. Because I strongly believe that just the thing that sort of causes what I guess you could say like fundamental stability in terms of pricing of goods and services and exchange rates and so on. It's microeconomics, right? Supply and demand. And what monetary policy is about is basically adjusting the supply, right? It's like how much, I guess you can say it's how much money are the banks allowed to print, right? And you can, if you want to contract the money supply, you can just tell the banks that they're not allowed to print as much money as what they're currently doing, which is basically what central banks spend their time doing, right? They sit all day and then try to decide whether they should let the banks print more or print less. And I think also this view that having a very diverse and wide market and a lot of different trading relations absolutely also contributes a lot to stability, right? Because it's just natural that the more liquidity there is and the more activity there is in the market and overall like the size of the economy and of the market creates a level of inertia that ultimately translates to stability.
Cool. One more quick question, and this guy fought for it, so it better be a good one.
So we're also excited to be part of this decentralized community. But for the hundreds and thousands of new ERC20 issuers, currencies, it is almost impossible to get on an exchange. Some exchanges want to be paid a lot of money. Some exchanges are terrified of the SEC and regulators. We need to create a path, a roadmap for new currencies to end up on exchanges that create liquidity. And I'm really over it that when I speak to exchanges like Shapeshift and others, they say, oh no, we won't list you until you have liquidity. But we can't get liquidity until we get listed on the big exchanges.
Well, if your complaint is that markets are competitive and it's difficult to get attention, I don't know that I can make you feel better about that. There are a lot of competing interests in a marketplace, and to design a system that tries to figure out which things are valid and which are not without the chaos and trial and error and buying and selling of a market, I think would be a bad idea. Generally, if a project gets enough enthusiasm around it, exchanges will start listing it. Some exchanges take money to list tokens. Shapeshift never has. But even if you will not pay any exchange to get your token listed, if people are excited enough about your project over time and you're persistent enough, some enterprising exchange will add it. So Occam's razor usually is if you can't get listed on an exchange, they just don't feel like your token has earned their time to take a bet on your project yet.
Awesome. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.